Later that on April 1 and April 2 and April 3 and April 4 before April 5th and April 6th. On April 1 before watching Bluey. On April 1 on a beautiful sunset day. On Sagwa the Chinese Siamese cat. And on Max and Ruby. On Max and Ruby, Sagwa, Shigwa, and Dogwa were about to sleep. Sagwa says it was kind of fun hanging out with you in the just like that, when Sagwa says it was kind of fun hanging out with you, and then Shigwa says, yeah, you're right, it was kind of fun hanging out with you, except I'm ready to go sleep. Come on guys, let's all get some sleep. And then Dogwa says, great idea, Shigwa. And then Sagwa says, yeah, let's all get some sleep. And just like that, when Sagwa says, let's all get some sleep. It's getting kind of late, let's get some sleep. And then Dogwa says, great idea. And then Sagwa says, good night, Shigwa. Good night, Dogwa. And then they said, good night, Sagwa. And then Sagwa, Shigwa, and Dogwa were fast asleep. While they're fast asleep, Sagwa was trying to sleep, but she can't sleep. And then, just then, the rat leaves his hiding place and makes his way into the yard, going for the fence hole and waiting for Sagwa to go sleep to sneak into Max and Ruby's house. And the rat wants to hurt Fluttershy's little kitten, Metal Claws. Sagwa can't sleep. She was wide awake. She spotted the rat and she attempts to hiss at the rat and growl at the rat. And she chases after the rat. But Sagwa has forgotten that the rat is climbing on top of an open window and into the parents' room where Metal Claws is sleeping. Sagwa began to meow at the rat, saying, meow, 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 meow. And then Ruby tells Sagwa to be quiet. Ruby says, Sagwa, in the just like that, when Ruby says, Sagwa, it's late, what's wrong? And then Sagwa began to meow, and then Ruby says, Sagwa, I'm tired. Sagwa's helpless is to stop the rat, but he enters the nursery window, and we can see that Ruby's not looking. The rat enters the room, and then Sagwa says, and then Ruby says, I'll talk about that tomorrow, before closing her window. And then Shigwa and Dogwa were awake. They hear Sagwa meowing. And then Sagwa tells them that there's a rat in the house. Dogwa says, Sagwa, what's wrong? And then Shigwa says, we heard you meow. What's wrong? And then Sagwa says, Shigwa, Dogwa, there's a rat. And then Shigwa says, where is it? And then Sagwa says, in the living room in Max and Ruby's house, and I can't get in. And then Dogwa says, don't worry, Sagwa, I'll get him for you. And then Shigwa says, and I'm coming with you. And then Dogwa says, we'll get him for you. And then Sagwa says, great, do you know where he is? And then Shigwa says, we know. And then Dogwa says, we'll get him for you. And then Shigwa follows Dogwa into the living room. And then Shigwa says, Dogwa, any sign of the rat? And then Dogwa says, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. And then Dogwa has found the rat and attempts to hiss at it. And the rat saw Dogwa with the creepy face. And then Dongwa began to fight the rat around the room, knocking over furniture, knocking over chairs and lamps. And then Dongwa began to fight the rat around the room, knocking over furniture. He began to chase the rat around the room. And then after that, the rat jumps on top of the shelf. It was a terrible fight while Dongwa is chasing the rat. And then the rat jumps over Dongwa, over his head. Meanwhile, Sangwa burst into the house and went to help Shigwa and Dongwa. Her helpless is to stop the rat. And then Dongwa was still chasing the rat. And then during the fight, the rat climbs on top of Metal Claus's crib. Shigwa and Sangwa felt worried if the rat wants to hurt her. But just before the rat was about to jump into the crib, Dongwa bites it on the neck and continues attacking it. And he throws it and continues attacking it. But his rage has made him accidentally knocked over the crib, waking up Metal Claus and caused her to cry. It's because the crib got knocked over. That's what it woke her up. Dongwa knocked it over by accident. Metal Claus wasn't hurt. She just got startled because the crib got knocked over. She was just safe in the cupboards. It's because the crib got knocked over. That's what it woke her up. Dongwa knocked it over by accident. While Sangwa watches her, Dongwa manages to corner the rat behind the curtains and killed it. But not only before that, his paw was a little scratch after the rat bit his ankle. But before Sangwa and Dongwa were about to do a high five, Max, Ruby, and her parents rushed in the room. They did not see the dead rat, just Sangwa and Dongwa and the overturned crib. Also, Ruby says, Metal Claus, and then Max says, is she alright? And then Ruby says, I don't know. And then Dongwa says, uh-oh, let's get out of here. And then Ruby says, there's another cat in our house, but what's she doing here? And then Max says, wait, I think she's trying to tell us something. What is it? What is it? And then Shigwa wants to explain, so she needs Max to follow her into the living room. And then Max says, what is it? Guys, Ruby, over here. Then Ruby says, what is it? Then Ruby says, a rat. And then Ruby's mom says, wait, I thought two cats were not attacking Metal Claus. It turned out they were just saving her from the rat. And then Sangwa says, they know my brother. And